Hello people. So I wanted to explore a concept briefly. If we look at the main mandala from the human design here, even though it corresponds to certain parts of our personal energy field, I think it also, in the grander scheme, correlates to things that are out in the world. So this graph happens in relation to an entire society. I think that the amount of complexity that an actual explanation of this would include would probably be beyond my both capability and tendency. But let's just consider the entire edifice of humanity, with the fashion, with the different things on relationships, with different things on the economy and the way government works, is all somewhere in this chart. So we see the Gate 49 as an example of where resources are allocated. We might see the 2145 in meritocracy and economic matters. We might see the tantric channels going from the sacral to the G-self to do with societal attitudes towards sex and love and how much those two link. And also, a connected concept is that I think society very often takes the best parts of people and twists them, because society itself is laid out in a manner that is a little malicious in some cases. So as an example, I heard a story of a girl that when she was young, all she really wanted to do was be a housewife, and I think she could very, very easily be convinced to have had children. She was very submissive, very, very feminine. But the guy she'd met at that time had basically told her to make sure that she got a job. It sounded like he was looking after her, and he was probably saying the right thing to her, because, you know, the world is a hard place. But even so, that part of her that just wanted to settle down, which is a very loving, positive part, a very archetypal maiden sort of thing, was not really taken in a positive context, and she became quite unwell from having to work very, very hard in her life. And that was explicitly mentioned by her as one of the things that made her unwell. So what I'm basically saying is that there is a mandala that is the way that the whole world works, and then if you have an energy that hooks into that place in society, then it's going to be hard for your energy to work properly in relation to that. I'm not saying that people don't work it out, and it doesn't work out very well in a lot of cases, but I still think that is an element. So if we look at my chart here, there was a time when I got quite ill and I wasn't working. And you can see that I have the 2145, and I went headlong into financial stuff. So financial news, looking at stock markets, all that kind of thing. And I concluded, as a lot of people do in these areas, that there was going to be a huge crash soon. There was like a housing bubble, all this stuff that I learned about the way stocks work and all that kind of stuff. But the more I watched it, the more it became clear that there wasn't going to be a crash. And the more it became clear that the game was rigged on a level that I could barely comprehend. So the way I look at it is that if society had been healthy in the way financial markets run, then that 2145 would have likely gained something from that investigation. I would have looked into the financial stuff. I would have had something interesting to say about it, and then that would have been helpful. It would have informed the way I lived my life. But because society is so completely corrupt in that area, this kind of didn't go anywhere. This 2145 that was willing to do the work wasn't able to gain any benefit or traction from this. And I think that when we look at the entire society and deconditioning in the outer planets, I think that this is a huge element of the whole thing. This was a big insight for me while the moon went over the gate 41. So I was getting insights into the gate 60 and the gate 41. I've noticed that the transiting moon just tends to be what we're generally thinking about. It's a general theme of the day, that kind of little annoying thing that you start thinking about. That tends to be the transiting moon to me. And while it went over that place where Pluto is, I realised that a lot of the themes that I would be working with while the Pluto is in the gate 60 and moving into the gate 41 require the cooperation of other people. Of course, Pluto is a collective planet. So if I'm doing something in gate 60, then someone else also has to be doing something in gate 60. And the same shift when the planet moves into gate 41. And I'm wondering if, looking at this chart, which is David Wilcock's chart, whether we could find a bit of a pattern with what I've just said here. Now, if you're not familiar with David Wilcock, I have talked about him a little bit in a fair few videos. And basically the way I conceive of this guy, you don't have to agree, but the way I think of him is that he was someone that was genuine at one point, really wanted to get into the New Age sphere and make an impact, tell everybody about the harvest and we're all going to have an ascension and all that kind of stuff. But at some point he fell off the wagon, associated with loads of questionable characters, and he seems to be associated with whistleblowers for which there is no evidence that these people are whistleblowers, and for which there is a lot of evidence in quite a few cases that these people are con men. So Stephen Cambion is the person who covers this. Stephen Cambion at Truth Seekers. But taking that description of David Wilcock, I am wondering if that's what's happened here. So he has the 3635 here from his conscious Venus, and the 36 is thought to be about crisis, and when it links to the 35, it tends to be about crisis moving to progress. So it tends to be about hope, as I see it. It's, we have these problems, but this is the great way that it's going to turn out. That's very consistent with David Wilcock's message. We also looking at emotional manifestor here, and we can see the emotion, the solar plexus, is defined, and David is very emotional. Remember, he's a Pisces as well. There's a lot of emotional hexagrams here, but he doesn't have the ego, so he doesn't have the willpower, the natural sense of boundaries and the toughness, in a sense, to work against conflict, which is one of the things that the ego does. So it seems to me what happened to him is, I don't know what happened in his childhood or what has happened, but it looks like the design wasn't able to square the fact that it had all this belief and this hope after reading the Law of One and believing we live in this fantastic world and have a very Pisces way of looking at things. So David really believed and really wanted to believe that we were moving into this golden age and all this kinds of stuff that he says. But the evidence wasn't there. And the evidence might not have been there for the same reason that when I was younger I wasn't able to make any headway in understanding financial markets. It's because the game is so rigged. There is someone behind the scenes of society that has so controlled the information flow that something that David intuitively knows is not showing up in the reality, and because it's part of his energy field, he has pushed it into people like Corey Good, who admitted under oath that his stories were visualizations, imaginations and stuff like that. I mean, there are defenses against this in David's chart. If you look at the gate 32 in the Venus, that would very much say things like change isn't going to happen, change is a slow process and stuff like that. But I think you have to put in a little more work to get to the outer planets in consciousness. And I think there's a good possibility that drugs or mad enthusiasm or any of these other things could mess up the chart a bit. And we don't know if David is living according to strategy. So what I think is happening now with David is he was designed in a sense to be this messenger of hope in a sense, but he was not designed to have associated with some of the people that he's associated with. So now when he gets pushback, this emotional center here, which is very active, it's got the 55 there and everything, really gets very, very upset and angry about all this stuff, mainly because the ego isn't there to defend. And of course, the emotional solar plexus, I tend to think, is about community. I've come to that conclusion. It's more about the whole than it is about the individual, and the emotion wants to discharge its emotion within a group of people. And David spends a lot of time alone, lives alone and such like that. And I think that's where the various blockages are probably coming from. But those are just my thoughts. Anyway, thank you for listening.